food and don't take them. They're free.
Okay, well, we should get started. Sean Washington's going to talk about creating hubs for biodiversity. Sean has he's from Oklahoma City, right? Yeah, he has a podcast about science, naturalist stuff. It's really great. If you haven't heard it, check it out. And also, he's a part of the Young Naturalist Club, maybe the founder. Yes, I think the founder.
Yeah.
And I've been following him on social media, and you guys seem really awesome, doing really amazing things. And so, thanks for coming out.
First off, yeah, I love it. But now, got straight into it. But there's a lot of reasons people get into gardening. For example, oh, my parents got me into it, and I just kept going. Or, oh, I just really love lilies. I just really love them, so I got really deep into gardening for lilies. My story is a little bit different. This is why I started gardening. Dinosaurs. Plain and simple. Now, I know it sounds odd, but here's the reason. I wouldn't be here without them, and I wouldn't be doing science communication period without dinosaurs. Now, I initially got into nature because I wanted to go out and research dinosaurs. Just go out into the wild and go and explore, go out into the bush and watch dinosaurs and see how they behave. It looks something like this. And I get to go out, enjoy all of that, do all the ecology stuff. And then slowly, I came to the sad realization every child that studying dinosaurs isn't this. And it's actually a lot of this, which nothing against paleontology or who are into fossils and all of that. It's really cool. I love it. You keep it over there. So my thought was, well, since it's not going to be dinosaurs, I might as well pick something that's close second or something close to it. And so I settled on birds. That makes sense. And can I tell you, that did not disappoint. Genuinely, what I was looking for was to be able to look at wildlife, to study how it behaves, how it interacts, all of those different things. Birds are found on every continent. Birds live in every ecosystem except the bottom of the ocean, which is amazing. And they feed on absolutely everything. If there's some bird that feeds on something that's really cool, it exists. Genuinely, I love it. And also the fact that we can be anywhere and find so many different species. In the middle of the city, we did a birding thing a few months ago, and I want to say it was just this random little shop downtown, and we found 15 different species. Just at one shop where it's surrounded by concrete, tall buildings. They're there. It's just you gotta pay attention and know what to look for. So I dedicated my yard to becoming the best haven for birds I could, because when I was younger, I cannot go and travel for birds by myself, being 8 to 10 years old. Not really an option. So instead, if I make my yard as bird friendly as possible, I get to see all the birds there. I don't have to ask to go somewhere and then travel around with my parents who are like, why are we out here in the middle of the woods? Doesn't make sense. So I did what I could to learn about what they are and what they aren't, and more importantly, what their needs were, so I knew what I was doing. And how these modern dinosaurs shape their world and how their world shapes them. So I have 3 categories for all the life that's in my backyard, with the exception of the plants. That's a little different. And I understand some of you guys might not agree with these categories, but I like them. First, from the bottom up, bird food, the bugs. I consider bird food any arthropod, invertebrate that is edible to the birds. Grasshoppers, wasps, bees, dragonflies, spiders. If it's there and it's small, thank you. You're feeding the birds I want to see. Next, the bird adjacent. They aren't birds, but you know what? I'll hang out with them. I'll see them and I'll be very excited to have them. It means that my backyard is a habitat that is healthy enough for the birds. It's great. So those are bats, possums, lizards, any amphibian. I'm an amphibian in my yard. And then top of the list, the birds. I mean, the greatest organisms on the planet. We love them. And we share this state with a wide array of species, according to iNaturalist, as of earlier today, because I had to update this number. Around slightly over 8,000 species have been spotted in Oklahoma. That's plants and animals. Well, sorry, I think that's just animals. Sorry. Each one exists in its own universe of connections and transition. You can't look at these ecosystems or species in isolation because all of these interact. The birds eat the bird food. So that means what the bird food eats is important for the birds. And so we're going to break down these barriers and give a new way to view Oklahoma in your back and how you do backyard conservation. First, quick introduction to me. My name is Sean Washington. I am a science communicator. I have my own company called The Fit Naturalist. Really cool, awesome. I do a lot of art, which I'm the secret you guys are selling over there. I sell shirts. Have a podcast, all of this stuff be amazingly cool about. And I work with ONPN, the Oklahoma Native Plant Network, as one of their education co-chairs. So we do a lot of different stuff, and I'm doing way too many things at this, but I enjoy it all. And if you'll allow me, we'll go on a journey through the year in Oklahoma, see what magic and connections exist, talk about the problems they face in a new way, and how I'm working to fight against that in my own yard, in my own space. So. How 1% can change your yard and create a whole new world. Really cool. It took a lot in me not to put a gift of the Little Mermaid in this because whole new world. Now, a year in Oklahoma ecosystem. This is going to be pretty abridged, though it's relatively dense because Oklahoma is a large state. We are one of the few states in the U.S., only about 4, that have more than 11 ecosystems. The other 3, Alaska, California, and Texas, were the smallest. So really cool. Which means a year in Oklahoma can look at least 12 different ways in those different ecosystems. So it's going to be pretty abridged. I'm skipping over some stuff. But let's start in the spring. Now, first off, there's weather. So storms bring rain in very good years. And rainstorms also mean thunder, lightning, wind, and potentially tornadoes. Okay. It's important to remember we're talking about the environment, not human building. Okay, so I'm going to say some stuff you're not going to like. These big storms break branches, water large swatches of the landscape. They kill trees and occasionally could start potential fires. That is not good if you own a home next to a tree. We don't like that. But water return to the environment after a cold and relatively dry season like winter revitalizes and sparks those seeds to jump back to life. Broken branches and downed trees create habitat for the myriad of organisms that rely on falling or dead wood. Raising young, nesting material, shelter, or just laying eggs in and on the dead wood. It also slowly helps the soil begin to break down and put carbon back into the soil and sort of enrich. And my personal favorite, dead standing trees are extremely important to the environment. I know we don't like the look of a dead tree that's just sitting there. Unless it's a danger to your property or something, please leave it. Because they are, nicknamed snags, are brimming with life. Bats, beetles, owls, hawks, fungi, ants, and the list goes on and on, all the different things that are specialized specifically to dead trees that are still standing. It's very important. If you have those, if you're wondering why, oh, I don't get to see these animals anymore. We've removed all the dead trees. They have no place to go. Next, plants. You can do it. Thank you. As the temperatures start to warm up, soils and flower beds burst into color with greens and a wide array of hues for wildflowers. This is what we've been waiting for the last 6 months of cold and wind. And I'm not gonna lie to you, this is the real joy of being a gardener is you sit out and you see the first thing in your yard bloom and you're like, oh, I can go outside and then enjoy the yard. The uptick in rain means that woody plants can get to work on showing new branches, and young plants can grow without being dried out by the cold winter winds. And as for wildlife, thank you. Spring migration is one of those events that gather lots of people's attention. Now, for Oklahoma County, bird migration peaks around end of April, early May. Actually, this week is peak migration for this area. It's really cool. You get a chance, step outside in the mornings, especially since it's been raining every night. Step outside in the mornings and just listen. Tons of birds out there. But it can last from late February up to June. Migration is bigger than just birds and monarchs. There's migratory dragonflies, moths, bats, flies, beetles, and a wider array of non-monarch butterflies. Now, many others we're still trying to figure out how they migrate, if they migrate, because they just don't get as much research attention. Now, to remind you, all of these are really grueling processes. Each one of these billions of species are flying thousands of miles as fast as possible. The vast majority of doing it weighing less than a quarter, and 80% do it at night. So they are making these migrations an absurd situation. And that's against the windstorms, that's against all of the heavy, like for example, the last few days where we had these extremely heavy like thunderstorms at night. Some of them are trying to migrate as far as they can before those storms start, and a few of them can actually migrate over the storms, which is wild. Hundreds of species make their way to Oklahoma as far as birds, and they come in 3 categories. The first is the transients. These ones come by, they stop over, and then they keep them. Oklahoma is just the landing spot, take a little bit of a rest because they're making these massive travels and they have to stop to refuel, to rest, to eat, to sleep, because migrating all night and then you have to wake up early and try not to be eaten by a predator makes you very under-rested. And those layovers can be at a park, backyard, balcony garden, dead trees, green belts, or anywhere else where they can find any sort of area to sit at. Back when I went to school in Colorado, we had a group of geese that were snow geese that don't live in that area in Colorado, but they migrate through, that would land in the middle of the entire campus because that was the one area of open grassy area. We had the iron fields. They could sit and rest for a few days before continuing north. And like, wild. There's just a group of snow geese just in the middle of campus. The next category is the summer birds, and they of course come here for the summer. They're here for our tons of bugs and plant material and nesting. And in the winter, these guys will get to know them. They're my favorites. But on with summer. During the summer, storms push the extremes of heat and humidity. Rain is often inconsistent, and when the skies do break in Oklahoma summers, it's always either 1 hour of light showers and then nothing for another 2 weeks, or an entire week of rain that floods surrounding areas. Now, native plants are they're used to a lot of the inconsistencies. This is the ecosystem they're used to. They are built for this. As for native plants, those flowers and sedges who thrive in comfortable and cool and damp world of spring will naturally die back in the fall, drop their seeds, and they're likely going to be done for the year. While those areas get taken over by things like coneflowers and native grasses. As for the bird food, they are having the best time of their lives. There's tons of plant material, there's lots of water, it's warm, they can grow, lay eggs everywhere. They've got ample access to pollen, flowers. There's nothing to stop them. So with that, we get the baby boom. And so because of that baby boom, by mid-June, most of our birds have already had their first brood. Those chicks are grown and they're ready to start fledging and foraging with their parents. And also by that time, all of our native bats have just given birth, and mom is hungry because she's just given birth to a baby, has to feed it on the wing. So all of this feeds all of these little babies. And by fall, the weather starts to dry, get windy. Oh, I realize that. Um, Dry, windy days start to drain out plants, aid in wind dispersing plants like milkweeds, grasses, and other species. The cooler air also changes the amount of sunlight. Cooler air and the changes of sunlight also trigger deciduous trees to drop their leaves. At the onset of fall, most plants prepare for their own state of dormancy, and that could be either dying completely in fall, or as some plants do, where they'll leave a crown of leaves at the top, and then the flowering stem sort of withers and either dies or stays standing. And they rely on a layer of leaves in some systems, a layer of leaves underneath to keep it protected from the worst of winter. Grasses put on their best show in the fall, and that's where you can see all the bright colors, the last layers of blooming plants pop out, and things like the sedges that come back to life during cooler weather. As for the bird food of the monarch, fall preparations for dormancy begin, and some species might start migrating. Spring migration is great, but in my opinion, the most important one is fall migration. From the first moment I start burning my money at, for example, Leah's garden, um, I think of what is going to be blooming or what seeds are going to be available during the fall, because that is the most important. Spring migration is pretty, it's gorgeous, you've got all the flowers everywhere. Fall migration is harder because all of the babies from this year are taking their first travel down south. They've never been there, they don't know where they're going, and likely they're traveling with their parents who are leading them down. Which means if anyone has ever gone on a road trip with children, you're going to have to make more stops. They have to have more food available. Thank you. They have to have more food available, more things that are healthy and safe stopovers for them to be in. And we get our residents and winter species that come in, because some of our birds, like the dark-eyed junco that is here all winter, they come from northern Canada, and this is their winter. This is their warm spot. Why? During that week that we had about 10 degrees, I just saw tons of them in my yard. I'm like, you guys must be loving this. It's comfortable. And they visit places like gardens, planted pots, and yards that are maintained to find seeds, and they play an important role in the ability to build fat, burn energy through the nights that are slowly getting colder and colder. Some animals like turtles, frogs, salamanders, and even bats take shelter either underground or under leaf litter for the worst of winter. Yes, bats that go into leaf litter. Eastern red bats are commonly during the fall they'll stay in trees, and then by the time that most of those leaves fall, they'll actually drop down with the leaves, and they'll go underneath leaf piles, and they'll curl up, and they stay dormant until it warms up again. Which is why another big reason, please leave me. There might be a bat underneath there, and she's just trying to rest the cold. And then winter, of course. Winter. Early winter in Oklahoma is normally cold and dry. Our winters are really interesting because we have two different phases of it. First one is normally a cold and dry, where it starts around December and then goes until about mid-January, where things are relatively dry. It's just you get cold, blasting wind every day. And then by mid-January into March is where it gets wet. And that's where we get all of our snowfall, the heavy ice storms, the really big phases where we get the not fun parts of winter. And that makes it very interesting to look at, because took both of these the same year, about 4 weeks apart. And that is just wild to think it's the same place and the same season. For plants, while the top side of most plants, of course, are dormant and they don't look like they're doing anything, that is the most important time for roots and for many of these larger, like trees and shrubs, to do a lot of their root growth. When protected by that layer of leaves that sort of keeps the soil from getting too cold, they can grow down, grow deep. That way, by the time the first phase of warmth hits, they can spring forth bigger, brighter, and have all the flowers you really want to see. Bird food, deep in dormancy. It doesn't take them out of the food web, many birds and mammals will go and dig and break soils, dead wood, or those old mud dauber nests to feed on the grubs that are still in there. And for the vertebrates and the birds and bats, they're doing their thing. The birds, like this junco, as I mentioned earlier, is traveling, finding all the seeds that are dropped. We have tons of different sparrows that travel specifically to southern Great Plains for the seeds that drop naturally. This is when they want to find all of that food, and that's their main food source during those seasons. And seeding birds like siskins and sparrows, especially travel here, make most other catch of seeds that would coat the ecosystem. And that's the year. And then it restarts, of course. So what is the problem facing wildlife? The main one is very basic, habitat fragmentation and habitat loss. Among all the different things, amongst all these different species that I mentioned, when I looked them up and looked for their threats, the vast majority had habitat loss as top 3, if not the #1 cause of decline for the species. And that's very sad considering many of them, their habitat, since we're talking about bird food, which has host plants and things like that, their habitat is relatively straightforward. It's just, is this plant available? Does this exist in the landscape where it can get to it, feed, grow, have its young, and then feed the ones I really want to see? Which is very interesting because that habitat loss is a very, like we talk about a lot, we mention it all the time, you hear it 1,000 times, and you guys are probably sick of hearing the words loss. So instead, I'm going to phrase it in a different way. Imagine you're going on a road trip with your family, and you go on this road trip every 5 years. It's sort of a tradition for you guys. You go, you're basically on Route 66. You're going to take all the way to the west and go to California. You always stop at roadside gas stations, historic restaurants, and notable locations. All the fun stuff. And when taking your kids on the same journey you enjoy so many times, you find that stretches of gas stations are farther and farther apart. Quality rest stops are harder to find or more expensive. And the restaurants that had been thriving and sources of delicious memories are now often, more than often, for lease. Any of this. So we can talk about the scientific impact of costs, and we can use the cold distance from referring to these things, but this is what's happening from a perspective of a species that's actually migrating. It's not that they can't find these things, it's that they don't exist. They don't have access to it. And if that's not available, then they can't come back. Now, there's an old thing that people used to say every time we have these conversations: if you build it, they will come. I think that's misleading, and I don't like that phrasing. I think it's more accurate to say, if you don't build it, they'll wander trying to find it. Because these are things that have no other option than to find those spaces. For example, when in fall migration, where the birds have to land because there's tons of young ones that need to find spaces to rest and relax because they've never made this long 14,000-mile flight before, and there's no place. Where are they supposed to go? You can build it and they might come, but if you don't build it, they'll have nowhere else to go. And I feel like this just puts a bit more pressure on it because that in some cases, in a lot of cases, most all cases. And it makes it a bit more important for them. So what I'm doing, I've called it the 1% Project. And it is something that I'm kind of working on in my own yard, and it's been very interesting. I started in 2019. I made some efforts to do a little bit of like restoration at home. I took a strip of the side of my front yard, and I was like, I'm just going to turn it into a little bit of native plants. Just the very cheap ones. I got a little packet that had some coreopsis and coneflowers, ones you can't kill. And I was like, I'll go through, toss these down, plant some of the coneflowers, and we'll just leave it there. And I had 2 things I had to take into account when doing this. Number one, my dad loves the mower. I think this man makes it a tradition every 2.5 weeks to go out and mow everything he can reach. Which love that. Please don't. So I had to find a spot that is away from where he would mow. So that means either under something that he's not going to be able to reach or in a raised pot. I chose a little bit of both. Um, and what happened the following summer was really interesting. This is what it looked like. This is one of the pots that I had. There's some beard tongue, coneflower. There's a sunflower up here, and I threw in a mix of seeds. There's a few little blanket flowers in there, and a bunch of other random items tossed in a native seed mix. I was like, do what you can. Um, and from that, there were tons of flowers. These came from that coneflower, and they fed tons of birds all winter. Goldfinches and chickadees landed on it, plucked all the seeds off of it by about mid-January. It was empty. And before the continuous mowing, weed and feed pesticides made our yard a sterile blanket, but on the edge of that green carpet was life. So in that strip that I'd made, it was kind of weird to see. You could sit out and you could look at the yard. There was maybe a dragonfly sitting across. And then you'd look at that little section, and you could actually see butterflies like flaring up and popping up and down. And it was just really, really amazing to watch. And so with that, what happened was I just kind of, this was me every day. I'd go out and just stick my face in every single plant. Somehow did not get stung by the many wasps that were hunting in that garden, but stuck my face in every single plant and looked at everything that was popping up. And mind you, I had only planted that about 2 or 3 months ago, and it was already full of different caterpillars finding it. There were butterflies everywhere. There was wasp hunting in there. It was unnecessarily successful. And so I did it again. From there, in the last 3 years, I have expanded that 4x12 strip in that one plant pot into 3 pots and 2.5 beds that cover about 0.6% of my yard. And the math here, and I said 1%, the math here is that if 1% of all Oklahomans turn their yard into intentionally native habitat, then altogether that equals about the size of Sequoia National. Amazing. And it's just 1%. And it's not like it takes up a huge amount of space, not a huge amount of work. It's just you get to see all of this. And that increase of intentionally native percentage, not only noticeable in the variety of plants, but also in the variety of birds and bird food. It seems every year I expand, I'm rewarded with new species to add to my yard list. In 2020, Philadelphia warbler, greater roadrunners, eastern redbacks that I saw a few years ago. Was not expecting to find them. Blue grosbeak, and just last week, actually, I had a pair of painted buntings in my backyard foraging. And I'm like, from a bird I'd never seen in the neighborhood and assumed there's no reason it would be back here. And there was a pair of them foraging and feeding each other. So I'm like, okay, you guys must be nesting. That's even more exciting. So that 1%, it matters, and I'm only at 0.6%. And I'm gonna see how far I can go before one, my dad realizes that I'm slowly taking over the yard, and two, before I get to see some really wild things appearing. Like, for example, our neighborhood, it's a little bit more on the wild side anyways, and we already have gray foxes and bobcats in our area. So it's nice to see them moving through the yard and foraging in some of that. Okay, I'm doing something good. And every couple of weeks, I'll add a few more plants. I'll see how it's going. And even this year, I'm kind of taking things a little bit more to the active side of it. And I have a friend who has a species of butterfly that I really want to have in my yard. She has them in hers, and I'm going to go and collect some of the caterpillars, bring them to my yard to have the host plant, and just start a second population in there. That way, in case something happens at hers, there's some here, and also I can. And for Oklahoma County, there's, I did the math, 460,000 acres that is Oklahoma County. If just Oklahoma County did 1%, that's 4,600 acres that is now intentional native habitat. There you go. That's amazing. That's wild. That's about 7.2 square miles. And mind you, it's not going to be all like everyone can cash in one spot, but it's a trackway. That way, on those long stretches of area that there's not habitat to stop, there's not places for wildlife to go. There's at least a little section of 1% in across the entire state, across the entire area that is so important to many migrating species. Now, is this easy? Not at all. It is not easy. As I said, this took me 3 years to get to this point, and it's going to take me likely another 2 to get to the full 1%. But is it straightforward? Not really. It's more so a trial and error thing. I've killed more plants than I've planted, and it's not fun. When you're like, I'll put you out here. And a few weeks later, it's dead, and you're like, cool, I'm glad you enjoyed that. So, but on the other side of that, is it fun? 1,000,000%. I absolutely adore this because every day I genuinely start my day. I go into the kitchen, make a cup of coffee, grab it, and go outside and just walk around the garden and look at all the butterflies and different insects, see what's happening, what's moving around, if anything new's popped up. Last year, for example, I just noticed there's 3 of these with Gulf fritillary butterflies in them. I've never gotten to a point where I was annoyed by a butterfly here. We were the only house in our neighborhood that had passion vines, so all of them came to our house, which meant that that vine was covered in them. And it got to a point where our neighbors nicknamed our house the Orange House because every morning it was just this big flare of like orange butterflies flying around the door, which is cool, but also, oh gosh, I'd like to have seen a flower, but they ate every single one of them. So now this year I've gifted my neighbors some passion vine. That way they can take some of the load and I can see a flower. But every year I do a little bit more, chip away, carve out some better stopping places than were here last year. And every time I do, I learn more, I meet more people, and I slowly convert my dad more and more to changing his definition of what a weed is. And isn't that what all of this is about? Just trying to encourage people to think not of things like, for example, frostweed. I told him that it was called frostweed, and he really had a fit. I'm like, wait, give it a few weeks and you'll see it flower. Now he's like, oh, when is it going to flower again? Like, love it. So I encourage you to take a calculator and find out how much your 1% is and try and do with that what you can. Whether it's a $15 planter from Walmart you fill with native seeds from on an apartment balcony, or a strip of wildflowers outside of a business. You will be amazed at how fast and vibrant life is when it has the space to return to. And who knows, maybe you might just do a little bit of dinosaur watching. Yeah. There you go. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Any questions?
Question for everybody else. I remember what area, obviously giving addresses, what area is your house in?
It is just north of the capital. Okay. North, well, in northeast Oklahoma, just north of the capital.
Very close to the new park.
Yes.
You can report on that.
I had, when I first moved to Oklahoma, I had a bird feeder in my yard, and I had a water trough for the birds. And then I was doing some work and I ditched those. But when I had that there were tons of migrating birds that came into the yard, and they were not all on the bird feeder. They were just in the yard, pecking in the ground. Robins, blackbirds, rose blackbirds, all kinds of birds. And as soon as I took those away, they stopped coming, those large flock birds. I don't know why, because they weren't eating from the feeder, few of them were, but most of them were just pecking in the ground.
Birds are
So,
messy.
yes.
Birds are messy. They're probably not the seed on the ground.
They probably dropped a lot of the seeds. I guess.
Yeah. And that's one part of it. Another part of it is that feeder while the black birds and things might not visit the feeders, they do use it as a sentry spot. So the birds that do visit that feeder, when they see a predator, which they'll probably have a better chance of seeing something than having your head in the grass, will let them know. And so if they don't see that space is safe, or they have that the way itself is going to be safe, they won't visit. That's another reason.
I have a question. What do you do with feral cats?
Feral cats. What I have done is I have made every effort in repelling them from the garden as much as possible, and in my efforts in removing a lot of the invasive, like vinca and privet, it's actually cut down on how often the cats visit my yard because there's less safe hunting spots they have. So it's like you're either going to visit, very easily seen, or you're not going to want to come.
I use a motion activated sprinkler.
So what?
Motion activated sprinkler.
The spray did not work. The spray or whatever, it smelled awful, but not.
I read that banana peels would repel them. So yesterday I put out banana peels and this afternoon they were sitting on them.
Like coffee grounds and
Yes, that's possible.
did not work.
You get a sweet gum tree near you, the balls and black doesn't. Just a cat. Of course, they are good jumpers. So you can't be a-
Micah, do you have any other announcements? You want to update us on this our June meeting?
Yeah. So yeah, next, for June and July, there's no meetings here, but we're gonna be doing 2 plant walks. That I'm organizing the plant walks, and I will help like lead them, but also anybody else wants to come and share their knowledge, that'd be great.